Please welcome SEANET's new NSF Program Officer, Dr. Stapleton.
I thank you all for the warm welcome, and it has been really beautiful. It's been great to meet everyone. Everything's flowering, lovely weather. Really appreciated my welcome here. So I wanted to just cover some of the basics about NSF and then highlight some of the accomplishments in the funding in Maine. So I'll talk about NSF itself, so the organization, the kinds of funding themes, and the funding characteristics of the agency. Talk about EPSCoR specifically, because within NSF, EPSCoR is a bit different, who we are and the kinds of investments that EPSCoR makes, particularly RAI, research investments, co-funding, and workshops. Then I'll focus in on funding to Maine and the NSF funding opportunity highlights, things that I picked out that I thought might be especially relevant to this audience, and ways that you can participate as well. So this is a picture of the new NSF building in Alexandria in the mission of NSF to promote the progress of science, advance the national health, prosperity, and welfare, and secure the national defense. So NSF includes all of these components of the mission in these themes. So there's research themes. So we typically talk about these as big ideas, all of them together. So it's easy to say and easy to remember. We have research theme areas and process theme areas. So harnessing the data revolution, work at the human technology frontier, navigating the new Arctic and many different dimensions of that navigation. Windows on the universe, so multivariate analysis and astrophysics. The quantum leap, another very broad theme spanning all of these different applications of quantum technology and information science, understanding the rules of life. And then there are process ideas, and these are things that you're familiar with from SEANET. So things like research infrastructure, growing convergence research. So convergence is taking a group of people, a very large group sometimes, and doing what you've done, work together for larger goals and produce new knowledge, okay, as part of that larger big picture. Innovative new ideas that will grow into larger themes, which is titled NSF 2026. So a way of capturing all of the great ideas that are out there without limiting it. So anybody can submit to NSF 2026. We've had some really fascinating presentations from high school students, for example, about what the future of science should really be. And NSF includes, which I'll mention a bit more as toward the end, so, which unites together some of the themes about human resource development in the sciences. I think of NSF as science at scale. So it is a large federally funded agency, and we do handle large amounts of all of the process of getting science going and keeping it going. The human dimension, the specific research equipment dimension, and the actions of those people and those instruments together. So you can just get some idea of the scale from looking at these kinds of numbers. So 49,000 proposals a year, all of which are carefully evaluated. We have a sort of standard NSF-wide process for peer review. We're thought of as kind of the gold standard for the way that we do peer review. So, 11,000 awards funded. So many scientists are supported by NSF, 350, close to 360,000 in a year. Okay. We see public-private partnerships. So SEANET's also a good example of how you can build that in to these larger projects with a goal of getting people out in the world and applying their science. So another thing that NSF does, and specific educational and human development efforts to go along with that as well. So I also think of NSF as being the first part of this pipeline to the bigger world. So getting people engaged with science, the tools of science, developing their abilities, and then letting them go off and do these amazing things that we might never even think of. So we start at that beginning point. So we fund early basic research and human development. Both are very important to the agency. There's lots of funding opportunities available. Your research development office can help you with specific details. Sort of wanted to mention some of the big picture. These are the individual groupings of types of science and activities in these directorates. So you can look in these specifically if you know your particular research interest, and also look at all of cross-cutting themes as well. Okay. There's special programs and special links. So in this particular URL, you go here first, you look at your research or topic area of interest, and then you can also look at your category. So special programs for K-12 educators. All of these funding opportunities organize these multiple ways, and they're all easily available there. Okay. So I really encourage you to do that. I also encourage you, if you're thinking about applying for grants, so to sign up for the bulletin, and I actually have little reminder postcards. Come up to the table afterwards if you're thinking about applying in the next few months, because I really recommend that you sign up for the notifications of interesting, quick turnaround, great new opportunities in the bulletin. So things that you might not notice if you didn't get them pushed to you. So there is a way that get push notifications on stuff that you might be that might be really relevant. And all of these have upcoming due dates, so you can plan. Okay, so next year, next spring, there's something that's going to be really relevant in my research area. I'll look at this now and be prepared when this time comes. So there's a substantial lag time for any larger solicitations, enough time for you to plan for them. So NSF supports basic research in their designated fields. So computer science, biology, social science, mathematics, environmental sciences, engineering, and physical sciences. Across all of the sciences and engineering fields, NSF's a third of the funding. So, and in some fields, like computer science, NSF funding is a major source for them. So we cross all of these sorts of areas of basic research. What we don't generally do is health-related research, because that's an NIH topic. They have their own setup for doing this. So we fund the physics, the math, the engineering, the biology, the basic biology. If you look at the amount of money that goes into these areas of research, so now I've abbreviated them along the x-axis by directorate and listed the dollars and millions on the y. EPSCoR in bright purple is a big, fair-sized chunk. So, and it is grouped together with other kinds of interdisciplinary programs that are funded out of the OIA office. So we have a noticeable set of money that goes to specific EPSCoR programs that are jurisdiction-based. So this is the congressional mandate for EPSCoR. It goes to specific places. All the other directorates have a non-place-based approach. They're topic-based. So EPSCoR is a bit unusual in that. So EPSCoR stands for Established Program to Stimulate Competitive Research. So that's a mouthful, so we almost always just say EPSCoR. And it's building infrastructure to advance science, but infrastructure extremely broadly defined. Human infrastructure, capacity, better brains with more knowledge than them that people can do more with. Infrastructure for answering your science questions, ranging from computers to instruments to research teams, SOPs, everything about building that infrastructure that lets you answer questions in research. We are place-based, so this is the congressional mandate to EPSCoR. It is different than any other part of NSF. There are other place-based EPSCoR programs in other parts of the federal government, Department of Defense, USDA, National Institutes of Health. So that's what unites all of these EPSCoR programs is our place-based approach. And place is defined by the amount of funding that goes to these specific places by state. So And we say, actually, instead of state, we normally say jurisdiction, because we want to also include the territories that are part of our mandate. So instead of saying state, we try to remember to say jurisdiction. For Maine, it's the state. So it is the jurisdiction. So this list is updated regularly. The eligibility criteria are also updated regularly. We're actually in the middle of that process now, discussing how NSF's eligibility criteria might need to be updated and how that relates in particular to the other EPSCAR programs in other parts of the federal government, to make sure that everything that we do is clearly spelled out, fair, sustainable, transparent, all those kinds of things. So we want to make sure that everybody understands how we pick this place-based approach and that it's predictable and straightforward. And so consistent across the federal government. For example, the USDA takes our list and uses it as is, but the Department of Defense has a slightly different calculation. For all of us, we're very concerned that these be open and transparent, and we're sort of continually working on that. So EPSCAR is there to build that capacity, that research capacity and capability. And this ranges from discovery and innovation through education and workforce and economic development. These are all tied together by this concept of building research capacity. So that means making research opportunities available, strengthening and catalyzing that capability in individual states and jurisdictions and across. So establishing professional development pathways. What do you do with your science background? How do you build on it? How do you take it really great new directions? So professional development pathways for science, technology, education, mathematics. And then how do you broaden participation? Science is a way of knowing. How can you make that way of knowing accessible to people? And not only that, from your just pure self-interest as a scientist, how can you get the voices that you need to make science better? We have started to be able to measure this with modern tools, and it's really sunk in that actually we need the broader voices. They really help build strong science. We can't do it without a diverse participation, and that was the catalyst for things like the big idea in SF 2026. It's very important to get those perspectives brought into science. It makes science stronger. And then we also want to see effective engagement at national and global levels. And impact jurisdictional economic development. NSF is a research area. I mean, we are early in the pipeline. But what we want to see is that people have thought about economic development. They have ideas about how early stage research might seamlessly connect to later stage economic development areas. That students understand how this whole process works, how the ecosystem of innovation works, all those kinds of things that it would apply to being early stage in research and also early stage economic development pathways. So what do we do at EPSCAR? We have some very specific ways that we allocate money to accomplish these goals. The largest group allocation of money goes to what we call RAI, or Research Infrastructure Improvement Programs. So there's 4 of these. They support all kinds of this infrastructure, really all kinds of infrastructure, human, physical, computational, across academic institutions, and build this research capacity and the competitiveness of these programs. This is NSF-wide. Any area that's funded by NSF is eligible to be funded by RII programs at EPSCAR. And we have co-funding. This is something you may not necessarily see. It happens sort of in an automatic way. But co-funding means that grants that you submit to your specific science directorate, the education directorate, the bio directorate, SICE, they are eligible to get extra money from EPSCAR. So this is an encouragement for the program directors who fund other areas of science to notice that people are from EPSCoR states, and they'll get a little bit of extra bonus in their budget to cover the funding of these proposals. So this is an automatic sort of process that once you turn in a grant from your state, this can happen. And it's an encouragement to get things funded across NSF, an NSF-wide engagement process. And we also think of this as a collaboration. This is a community building exercise, really, fundamentally. So we think of the funding that we do as something that we serve the community to build. And we specifically fund outreach activities and workshops that help us build this community. We have also the All EPSCoR meeting, which is in October, the PIs meeting, the new awardees meetings of various kinds. So we try to build a community amongst the EPSCoR institutions, and I come and visit you. So we also think of this as something that we assist in building. These are kind of come in levels of complexity and time. So track for research fellows is a relatively short duration, a couple of years, and also relatively less complex. So the program itself is relatively less complex, deals with smaller numbers of people for smaller periods of time. Track 3, which is actually been folded into the larger NSF Includes, so I'll come back to that. So it's grayed out because it's now being folded into Includes, is a Building Diverse Communities pilot that started early and has now become part of a larger NSF effort. Track 2 is this focused collaboration. So science is a team sport. There's no getting around that. It is. So, and we want to nurture that. So focused collaborations are a way for the EPSCoR program to specifically nurture this aspect of science. So they always follow NSF priorities, like the 10 big ideas, and they are across our jurisdictions, which is our way of ensuring that this collaboration provides synergy and builds both jurisdictions that are involved, or all the jurisdictions that are involved if there's more than 2. These are a bit more complex and longer lasting and more money. Okay. The most complex is the SEANET type, and that's track 1. So these are jurisdiction specific. The money goes specifically to that jurisdiction, so the money for SEANET comes to Maine. And it's multi-institutional within that jurisdiction. And multidisciplinary. We expect and we see that the track 1 proposals like SEANET bring together different areas of science and integrate them fully to get that synergy. Okay. And there's a cost share or a contribution from the state that reflects that this is a priority. And we are serious about this priority for this area. So the cost share is something that reflects that this is a main priority area. So track 1s, these large complex ones, they involve the state level management and state priorities, and they're about they're up to $4 million a year for 5 years. So you're toward the end of your SEANET 5 years. They are meant to build out the early stage, since NSF isn't early in the pipeline part of the government, the early stage infrastructure and human capacity that you need for this area that's a state priority. The track 2s are these focused collaborations, really aligning with the fact that science is a team sport and there is synergy. It's also, I think, less obvious to everybody, especially as you get started, but it's something that we think about. This is aligned with economic development in the long run, because in the work world, you are also part of a team. And this team sport science applies to everything that you'll do after you graduate if you're a student. It also applies to everybody that you work with. One of my colleagues said, I didn't really know anything about all the literature on this or any of that, but I realized a few years ago when I was a postdoc that I've never done anything by myself. So I should be happy, exploit that, pay attention to that. she rediscovered something that we all also have literature on, about the value of working with people and the pleasure of it in many ways. So these collaborations align with NSF priorities, 10 big ideas. If there's more than 2 jurisdictions, there's a larger amount of money, and they're up to 4 years. So they also have a fair amount of complexity because of managing all of this money across different institutions, and a fairly high level of oversight for those as well. Okay. Track 4s are relatively new. They started in fiscal year 2017. Support the collaborative visits again, so they're building this collaborative capacity for early stage career folks. So non-tenured investigators from EPSCoR institutions can go and build a collaboration. And this provides the tools that they would need to really get that going. You have all of those in Maine. So. EPSCoR co-funding, I'll just mention it again briefly. There are some rules for this. I guess this is maybe more for sort of internal NSF, but it's something that you can discuss with a program officer in a discipline area, perhaps. You can remind them that you're an EPSCoR state. What we actually do make sure that it fits with EPSCoR goals. Does need to be a new PI. There needs to be student involvement. It does need to be collaborative. It's hard to think of science that isn't nowadays. Synergistic with our other NSF investments, broaden this participation, and integrate research and education. So any proposal in any directorate that is from an EPSCoR jurisdiction that meets these kinds of criteria is eligible for co-funding, and this does happen. It's an internal process. Okay. Workshops and outreach. We have a new workshop solicitation coming out anytime now. The old one is actually still active. So do consider this. Think about EPSCoR workshops. So they support EPSCoR community-wide activities, things that let you share best practices, build collaborations across EPSCoR states, all the things that you might want to talk about with other folks in the EPSCoR programs, or things that you would think would be valuable first to share with EPSCoR states that would also be valuable to spread. Okay. You want to plan and implement these in areas of importance, and the current solicitation is still active and the new one will be out soon. Okay. Outreach is visits. So you can request an EPSCoR program officer to come and visit if you are holding a particular kind of meeting. Recently, we've had several folks visit meetings that are meant to better integrate economic development activities with EPSCoR activities, for example. So program officers have been requested to talk about how that works within NSF. It's maybe not as obvious because since we fund early stage research, the connection to industrial economic development and the private sector isn't always as clear, so we're happy to come and talk to folks about that. And I've noticed, I think they've done 3 of these this year already. Okay, and we have a contact person for that as well. Recent EPSCoR funding has been reasonably upward trending. So this is a congressional mandated program, operates kind of by this proportional dollar allocation approach, so it does tend to be relatively stable. So we're over 170 slightly for the first time, though, 170 million. So co-funding and outreach is typically a reasonable proportion with the research infrastructure, the majority of funds that we give out. A few details here. So we're just slightly over 170 million for last year. We anticipate given past history, we don't expect too much change over the next few years, as much as we can predict federal funding from past history. I want to shift gears here now and talk a little bit about Maine funding. So NSF funding specifically to Maine by fiscal year. This is all public information. If anybody in your research office is interested, they can make these kinds of pictures too. So NSF funding to Maine has generally been going up, especially this past year. So here's an arrow showing a nice upward trajectory of funding. So the purple is education and human resources, funding sources from NSF across all of NSF, and research funding across all of NSF, so in millions of dollars. So 2018 had a nice bump up for everybody in Maine. Okay, 102.6 million total over since the beginning of the EPSCoR program in Maine, so when Maine joined in 1987. So, and there's also been substantial co-funding over those years since Maine joined the EPSCoR program, 26.6 million in co-funding as well. So there have been substantial efforts, including the investments in things like SEANET. And there's been directorate leveraged co-funding, sort of a different category of money, that also is a substantial contribution to research infrastructure in Maine. Okay. Success rates. This is something that everybody should be proud of, because success rate is the amount of money that's awarded for each per effort. So, you know, what proportion of your proposals that you turn in actually get funded. You don't want to be turning in a lot of proposals that you don't get funded. So success rate is a really important metric. While you see variation, as you might expect, there's also an upward trajectory here in recent years. So there's been an increase in your success rate in Maine in fiscal year 2018 as well. The number of proposals have actually been about the same over the years. There really isn't much variation in that. I would point out that this is the overall, across all NSF success rate for the last 2 years. So 2018 has been proportionally quite high for Maine. Building the research capacity. That's what that looks like. So there's no error bars around these kinds of points. It's just a trend. But it's a positive direction that your success rate is going up. So opportunities at NSF. So this is part of building your capacity too. Where can you get support for answering your science questions and building on your strengths? So I want to highlight and think about ways that you can keep informed here. I'd say one really cross-cutting theme across these big ideas is harnessing the data revolution. There's lots of data out there now. Being able to use that, build knowledge from it, is something that I think almost all scientists can sympathize with. So it's fundamental research in this area, though. So here is where you might think about collaborations. If you have an idea for ways to produce useful new knowledge, you can think about collaborating with people who can help you do the research that's needed to figure out how to put that all together. Okay, so these are projects that develop the infrastructure and do the research that's needed to build useful information out of floods of data. Okay. There's research across all directorates. There's educational components, so innovations in delivering education in this area. And there's advanced cyber infrastructure, so figuring out how to build the compute chips and the cabling and all of those kinds of things that go into being able to analyze very large, very rapidly moving, very heterogeneous types of data. So all of these things fall under this area of harnessing the data revolution, and it's something I think that can be relevant to almost everybody in science. Okay. There's 4 new solicitations already released. So these solicitations that are released have a long set of instructions for applying, have deadlines, have people to ask for information. There's also the Dear Colleague letters that are faster, quicker opportunities for a whole range of different kinds of funding. You want to keep track of both. So harnessing the data revolution solicitations that are already out this year include all of these. So there's ideas labs, there's frameworks, there's transdisciplinary research, there's more coming. So. And there are components of harnessing the data revolution across all the directorates. For example, the Track 2 theme this past year was harnessing the data revolution relevant for EPSCoR. And historically, EPSCoR has had their themes for more than 1 year. The one I also wanted to point out is something that's growing rapidly, or the parts are getting connected rapidly at NSF, and that's Convergence Research. This is something also I think that EPSCoR folks are uniquely well qualified to think about. So this incorporates science of team science and information integration. So building knowledge rather than building little disconnected chunks. So the Convergence Accelerator is the component at NSF that funds very rapid prototyping in this area. That's not going to be for everybody. There's also regular convergence programs that are more like traditional solicitations and research. But Convergence Accelerator is worth looking at because it's a new way of thinking about how you might do this kind of fast turnaround research. So it's a really new style of funding research, use-inspired, strongly connected to social or economic development areas that solves important national challenges. There's multidisciplinary teams. They all need to include both academic and non-academic partners. So SEANET folks are familiar with this idea. So you do work in phases. Okay, pilot projects up to $1 million, 9 months. Scale it up and do it. So that's the accelerator part. These are on a faster time scale than most folks are used to for regular solicitations. And then a smaller number that are going to be phase 2 for, again, a very accelerated time frame, but additional money. So a different kind of way of funding science and speeding up this convergence process, which is why they named it the Convergence Accelerator. Okay. There's 3 initial topics that have already started. They're actually going to, they call for workshops is open now. You have a couple of 3 weeks, so think about applying to a workshop. So in these 3 areas, open knowledge network, connecting information in new ways, different data types. All right, this is something that you can imagine from SEANET. You have been connecting all these different kinds of knowledge and this different kind of people. You have the background in this already. Okay. So open knowledge network, AI and future jobs in the national talent ecosystem. So again, you can imagine how your thrusts in SEANET can relate to these areas, and you might think about how you would want to participate in some of the workshops, deadlines coming up late in the 3rd week of June, or in some of these future pilot programs in these areas. Next I want to talk about includes. So because we used to fund this as a separate part of EPSCoR, and we've now folded this into the larger includes program, that's a big idea. Include stands for inclusion across the nation of communities of learners, of underrepresented discoverers in engineering and science. That's a mouthful. What does it do? Okay. Includes brings together people in this area to build approaches that really work, that are time-tested, and provide opportunity for everyone. So this draws on all the existing research that we have already done in these areas and pulls it together around these common themes. Okay. And although the acronym is a mouthful, the saying includes, I think, really captures this. The goal is to pull all this together, to be really inclusive. There's a national network with leads, partners, coordination, and alliances. So, and this is growing all the time. There's one in Maine. So the Includes network across the US has activities associated with each of these nodes, and the blue lines are actually the connections, the specific and deliberately structured connections between these areas. Okay, so they're called the backbone. They, like the internet backbone, connect all of these parts together in networks. So the main award, you can see up there in the corner, is a lead for the design and development pilots. Another opportunity that you may not be as familiar with, that I think is also a good fit to folks from SEANET, is the opportunity to explore with engineering and industrial partnerships, so IIP for short. So it includes grants with specific industry goals. So the GOALI program, which has a defined structure, So it includes shared cooperative research that's industry-driven, which is a more flexible program. So this cooperative research centers aspect. So these are often very large scale, but with a background from a large scale project like SEANET, you might consider these kind of center funding areas in NSF. And supporting innovative technology, so the Partnerships for Innovation program. These are all things that build on the kinds of expertise that you have in SEANET that NSF funds. Okay. And you can partner with startups. So there's SBIRs, and there's also entrepreneurial training in I-Corps. So if you have startup partners, or if you have some really great alums that were just ready to get out there and start their own thing, there are funding opportunities for that as well. For graduate students in the room, you probably already know about graduate research fellowships. They're a very successful NSF program that's been scaled up. And there's university support for doing this. I encourage all graduate students to apply and to plan ahead to get some assistance, because assistance is also available for you now. So there's also worldwide or international experience programs through the International Directorate, and collaborative research programs for working with a federal lab, so like Oak Ridge or Lawrence Berkeley Lab. So there's programs available for graduate students for those too. For advanced graduate students, there's also doctoral dissertation improvement grants in certain fields. Something I'd really like to highlight that has been very popular, and I think is really terrific opportunity for graduate students, and not directly related to EPSCoR programs, but something that everybody should know about and tell your friends about. If you have funding from another directorate in NSF, your advisor can ask for an intern supplement for you, and you and your advisor together apply for this, and it lets you work with an industry partner. So it funds this work. So there's a nice portal for all student opportunities here, not just NSF, for every single one. That's another thing to note. Okay, so think about intern supplements if you have other sources of funding beyond EPSCoR. We actually co-fund these, so that happens automatically. So it's one of the things that we think is really worth our co-funding, and we went to the trouble to make sure that we can co-fund from any area in NSF for intern programs. And keep track on other things that you might qualify for if you're a grad student. There's lots of things out there. It's a really great experience to learn how to describe your work and to convince other people, other scientists, that it's worth allocating money to. Also for undergrads, there's portals. There's advanced technology education, HBCU, teacher scholarships, talent expansion programs. These are also folded into the graduate research fellowships, because you're eligible to apply your last year as an undergrad. And there's larger scale, university scale funding for research experiences for undergraduates, and we have that in SEANET, these RU-like programs for undergraduate involvement. Again, the important thing for undergrads to realize is that there's a single portal for undergraduate opportunities, includes NSF and everywhere else. So keep an eye on that. Think about applying for funding. It's a great resume enhancer for an undergrad. So if you have undergrads who work with you, make sure that they know about this, and that they consider doing it. For you, everybody, how can you participate in these kinds of funding opportunities? For one, stay informed. It's not always easy. So you could sign up for daily bulletins. Unfortunately, sometimes you have to read stuff that isn't relevant. You could keep an eye on the solicitations. You can use the student portals. But that's first and foremost. Look at what might be available. Think about what you can take advantage of and what you can contribute to. So understand how NSF works. So that was my goal today. Give you a little overview of how it works. Think about what opportunities there are. And what collaborative opportunities there are as well. Okay. Look at things that got funded. Surprisingly informative. So what happened 6 months ago that's now getting money? It shows up and is easily searchable. Look at things that got funded in areas you're interested in. Talk to people about how they get funding. Talk to program officers like me, okay? Talk to your state leadership and your grants development office. They can all help. So our goal at EPSCoR is to build this capability, including the capability to explain to other people what's so important about your particular science questions and to fund those questions. Do all of the training opportunities that go along with this, grant writing workshops, various kinds of grant conferencing, and don't be chicken. When you're ready and you're confident in the importance of what you do, apply. Okay? You don't get if you don't ask. Okay? But you don't want to, not do a good job of selling your work. You want to make sure that you meet the criteria, that you really feel ready and confident. Okay? Revise and resubmit. So there's often less money than there are good proposals. Go into it being prepared for that fact. So there's never enough funding to fund everything that everybody wants to do in the world. So it will happen that you will be changing your focus, being even more convincing about what you're doing, and resubmitting. And then manage the money that you get in a way that sets you up well for the future. So another skill to think about, not just getting the money, but leveraging the money. Okay. Serve as a reviewer. That'll help with all those things. You'll see what people do, what they do well, and what they do poorly. Okay. And think about being a program officer. They talked me into it, and I'm really glad they did. So that's another way that you can serve the larger science community as well. Okay. There's summer scholars. In fact, I have a summer intern starting in next week. So there's an internship program at NSF for people from certain institutions that are run through these professional association type societies. And there's a more senior level program as well. So if you're finished with your PhD, the AAAS Fellows is the place that you would serve your science community. Okay. There's also opportunities for people who love the infrastructure for science, so if they have at NSF, to work at NSF. We always advertise job opportunities for current students and for program officers. So thank you very much.